Hello, my name is Jarrell Green. I am part of Team Australia, and today we'll be going over our digital forensic expert testimony. During this testimony, we will discuss a summary of the summit. We are going to answer 5 testimony questions, and we are going to end with our references. Now we'll begin with a summary of the summit. Project 1 focused on establishing a security baseline. All cybersecurity efforts need to start with the understanding of the state of the network and what vulnerabilities exist. This can be done by establishing a security baseline of the network to further understand these concepts. According to Ding, Wu, Tan, and Zhang, security baseline is an important part of information network security application research. It is a basic requirement for business system securities and also a prerequisite for conducting security assessments and solving information system security problems. In other words, it would be impossible to solve a network security crisis without the proper understanding of what is abnormal and what is not. It cannot also be done without the understanding of the requirements, policies, and guidelines that govern cybersecurity efforts. The purpose of this project was to build that security baseline and understand the underlying circumstances of securing the network during the global summit. Project 2 focused on incident response and understanding attack vectors. The overall purpose of this phase was to further understand attack vectors and vulnerabilities, incident response, and indications of attack that are relevant to each Five Eyes nation. It is important to mention that these steps that were taken during this phase are in response to the suspected denial of service and data exfiltration attack that was launched on the Global Summit Network. The phase focused on what to do in the event of the attack, how to share information among the different nations attending the conference, and what the next steps are in the event that an attack is suspected. Within this phase, Team Australia took the phased approach that included identifying and analyzing attack vectors and known attributions, analyzing vulnerabilities, responding to the attack, incident response, information sharing, and providing digital forensic findings of the investigation launched because of the attack. Project 3 focused on business continuity and responding to a ransomware attack. The third and final phase centered around a ransomware attack that was experienced on the network. The Remington ransomware was launched through a phishing email that contained a Microsoft Excel file that seemed legit to the user. There were several key publications that were derived from the investigation in response to the ransomware attack that includes 3 situational reports, the business continuity plan, a cyber operation and risk management briefing, the intelligence debriefing, a lessons learned presentation, and the recommended next steps to be submitted to the Chief Information Security Officer. Testimony question 1. What are the legal challenges associated with cyber incidents involving foreign countries? How do internal laws affect e-discovery? When analyzing different legal challenges associated with cyber incidents, one of the most prevalent ones are those that involve foreign countries. According to Lee and Ken, the nature of the network itself changes some of the content and form of traditional crime, and perpetrators can commit crimes through virtual spaces that span several or dozens of countries without close contact with specific or non-specific subjects, and its results is far greater than natural crime. In other words, the immersive and expansive nature of the internet makes crimes committed in cyberspace more difficult to prosecute given the number of different jurisdictions that the crime could expand to. What this means is that there's reliance on international and internal laws that become vital in determining the proper action during an investigation. For Australia, internal laws include the Privacy Act, the Crimes Act of 1914, the Security and Critical Infrastructure Act of 2018, the Australian Criminal Code, and the Telecommunications Act of 1979. Each of these policy documents cover a different aspect of cybersecurity as it pertains to the prosecution for criminal cyber activity. For example, the launching of denial of service attacks from within the country is a violation of Section 477.3 of the Australian Criminal Code under the offense of unauthorized impairment of electronic communication. For e-discovery purposes, the following applicability of these internal laws may greatly affect Australia's ability to prosecute for cyber incidents given the fact that not all countries have a consensus of the attribution and proliferation of evidence of a cyber crime. While Australia has a robust e-discovery program for sharing applicable information, their ability to use this information is entirely dependent on what another country considers relevant pertaining to discoveries of evidence. The Australian Criminal Code mentions that the cybercrimes covered within the code have all extraterritorial applications, giving Australia extended geographical jurisdiction with the caveat that the offense either affects an Australian asset or the perpetrator is an Australian citizen. These laws could conflict with other nations depending on the extradition laws held by another country. Again, this is all depending on the consideration of the foreign government and their interpretation of the evidence that is provided. Testimony question 2. What are the legal challenges of accessing and retrieving electronic evidence stored on foreign soil? Assuming cloud storage was used, what procedures were followed to access and retrieve digital evidence stored in the cloud? In addition to the issues regarding legal jurisdiction, there are also issues that are experienced in retrieving electronic evidence stored on foreign soil. Electronic evidence that is stored on foreign servers are not easily accessible by Australia solely on the basis that it is needed for an investigation. Instead, a formal request needs to be submitted to the host country, leaving Australia completely at the mercy of the host country and their willingness to cooperate with the investigation. It is important to mention that it can get even more complicated if the information belongs to a corporation that is operating on foreign soil, as additional steps may need to be taken to subpoena the organization into releasing the information. Accessing cloud storage in another country to gather digital evidence is even more difficult. This is because it is difficult to determine where evidence is being stored. Australia would need to consider where the physical location of the cloud servers are being stored relative to the cyber laws that are implemented within that country. Australia will also need to consider the legal regulations and guidelines of that country and their willingness to cooperate with the investigation. It would also depend on the attribution of evidence and whether it is considered a crime. A crime on Australian soil may not be considered so in the host country, especially the ones hosting the physical servers. If it is found that the evidence is located within a partner country, such as the countries within the Five Eye Alliance, gathering information can be considered easier. Testimony question 3. Specific to the country that your team was assigned, how did the international laws and jurisdictions influence the processes and procedures followed during the forensic investigation? Prior to the cyber incident that took place, each of the Five Eyes nations worked together to establish a common framework for cybersecurity and digital forensic investigation. This allowed each country to work seamlessly in establishing the requirements and guidelines to be followed during the summit. For example, the ISO/IEC 27002-2013 and the ISO 27000 provided common ground for each of the nations when investigating the ransomware attack that took place. While there were policies that were followed solely by Australia, given the fact that the summit was located in London, conflicts and regulations often deferred to the host country. The implementation of these fail-safes allowed each country to work together with performing the various forensic investigations that were necessary following the cyber incidents suffered at the summit. Testimony question 4. What conflicts arose between ethics and international laws during the forensic investigation? How did these conflicts affect the investigations, and how were the conflicts mitigated and resolved? During the forensic investigations, there were no reported conflicts that arose between ethics and international laws. Because of the common framework that was established prior to the start of the summit, any ethical dilemmas that could have been formed would defer to the framework established in the host nation's cyber laws. Fortunately, the work done prior to the cyber incidents allowed each of the Five Eyes nations to work in cohesion. Testimony question 5. What steps were taken to protect United States soil and citizens during the international investigation? Describe any risks to the country, businesses, or citizens from your investigations. Due to the work done prior to the ransomware attack, including the implementation of an incident response plan, a business continuity plan, the institution of situational reports, and the overall rapid and efficient response to the cyber incident, the United States soil and citizens were able to be protected. Given the fact that the attack was focused on the summit, there were no additional steps needed to protect the homeland. As we learn more about the compromise documents located on the shared drafts between the nations, more information will be available on how this affected the United States.